In this video I'm going to demonstrate our XML API for Sage 200. Here I am on our PostTrans website and you can see here we've got a nice menu option here. I'm actually on the transactions page here, and as we can see there's various examples on here. I'm just going to actually demonstrate probably the first example on here. They're all fairly straightforward, or they are in my mind, haven't been the actual writer of the software. But if we scroll right down to the bottom, you can see here we have a whole series of information, basically tags. So the idea of the XML API is it just sits there, it looks for files in a directory or submitted through FTP or even an IMAPI email address. So you can have an external system firing off a nice little formatted XML file, which we'll see in a minute. And basically this lists what all the fields are or can be and what their purpose is and their options. Just wanted to touch on that sort of documentation. So let's just minimize that. Now there is quite a bit going on here because we're in a directory here, and it's a folder called in. Now when this is set up, we designate a folder to bring all the files, and whether you submit the files to that directory or it downloads them via FTP or even the IMAPI email address, basically the XML files come into this directory. And in one of those subdirectories is a folder called examples, which you'll see here. And these are all numbered, which match the examples that are listed on the website. So let's just right click on this one here. Now this is called SIM VAT value. SIM meaning sales invoice, and the M means that it's going to go to the sales invoice module. What have we got here? Well, we've got a nice bit of XML. So basically this encapsulates our Sage data. We've got a section at the top here that says settings. Now this whole section here is optional. You can designate the company that you want the XML importer to work with within the settings, or you can actually override those settings within the software, within the file itself. We also have a mappings file, which is kind of global or can be overridden in each file. And here we're saying mapping reset, which tells it to drop all its global settings and just use whatever's in this file. So we can ignore that to some extent. We'll see how to get this code in a second. So here we got the transaction header. So now we can say what sort of transaction this is, and as I said, it's an SIM. So if I want to bring in an invoice into the financial module, I would just change that to an SI. If I wanted to do a credit, I could change it to an SC, or if I wanted a credit note to the invoice module, it would be an SCM. Now, if I wanted to bring in a sales order, it would be an SO, or a purchase order even. Obviously, the account code would have to relate to a supplier in that case. But I hope you get the idea that it's fairly straightforward. Some of the fields are obviously relevant and not relevant to certain types of transactions, but the whole idea is the whole object is kind of a generic design, which hopefully takes a lot of the complexity out of integration with Sage 200. So moving down, we've got the account code. Now when the software selects the account code, that then sets the currency for the transaction, so it's going to work in whatever home currency the account is, unless otherwise specified. So here we just got customer reference and what warehouse we're going to move the stock out of, if there is stock items. And obviously in Sage 200 we've got various different stock types. So the first one is just a plain description. And then the second one we've specified, this is the second line on the transaction, we've specified a stock code. We want one of them and we're going to sell them at £250. Now that's the net value. It is actually possible to bring in inclusive of VAT figures, but only in the financial module at present. I'm not sure there'll be any change on that because the Sage 200 SDK does not actually allow the inclusive VAT for some strange reason. Second line, we've obviously got another stock code, quantity of 2, and then we've got a service charge. So we've just put here in a description, we've put the nominal and cost center department, the quantity, and the unit price. Then we've got an additional charge. Additional charges are set up in Sage 200. You can list them a bit like stock items, but very much simpler. and then a simple message at the bottom. So what I'm just going to do, just to prove I've brought this in, I'm just going to change that reference at the top, and I'm going to save that file. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to start the program physically up. So that's firing up, that's linking to Sage 200, and you'll see there on one of those lines there, I can click on it, and it's kind of given each company in the Sage 200 a code which relates to the code I've got on my file. So there's my file in my example directory. I can simply bring that into the import directory, and because import between certain time is ticked, you can see there it's just brought in that transaction, imported it. So I believe that's gone into the Sales Invoice module at 5099. So let's have a look at that in Sage 200. Let's bring Sage 200 over here, and we'll go in and have a look at the invoicing module and just refresh the screen. There we go, 999. So let's open that up. And there's our transaction. The first line was just a plain comment followed by 2 stock items, a quantity of 1 and 2, a service charge at 7, a delivery charge, an additional cost that was, and a description on the end. If we'd put some delivery information like a delivery address, and we can set the analysis codes and all that sort of business very simply using the XML. I shan't go into any greater detail than that really in this demo. It's all pretty straightforward, and like I say, there's a whole load of examples on the website which show various different types of transactions, such as purchase orders and all that sort of business. For instance, if I scroll down to somewhere here, TH transaction type, there's all my transaction types. So you can do quotes and pro formas, all that sort of business. Oh, I suppose it might be worth pointing out that having imported it, the file either goes to failed XML or imported XML. Now, if it fails, it can send an email to somebody with the information on. So now you could actually go in and have a look at that file. This is what I did earlier. This is a purchase order, and I hadn't got some settings correct. But you can see there it actually lists in the top of the XML, within a comment, it's appended all the error information. And hopefully I could then go down, maybe for some reason this isn't a valid stock code, so I could physically edit the XML file and then just copy it back to the in directory and import it again. Speaking of which, let's just go to the imported directory. Now you can tell it to just delete anything imported, but let's just actually have a look at what it did import. So it did import there, and it's telling you that it, what account it applied it to and the actual reference. So if you wanted to trace it back, you can actually find the transaction it created within Sage 200. Now the idea is each transaction's broken into a separate file, and therefore if there is an error, instead of having 100 transactions all in one file and it rejecting it somewhere, and then what does it do with the 96 that did go in and the 4 that didn't go in, you can actually physically go in and correct it. I mean, if there was a problem with one of those lines, you could actually, say, remove the line, import it, and then go into Sage 200 and manually add the line, in which case you might actually find out the reason it didn't like that line. Maybe there's something wrong with the configuration within Sage 200 itself. Anyway, I think that concludes a small overview of our XML API for Sage 200.